In general, any species, once adapted to certain climatic conditions, can survive there without housing, fire, or clothing. Burrows and nests are typically used for protection from predators or raising offspring. Humans, being primates, are no exception. On our ancestors' native lands, temperatures rarely dropped below 10 degrees Celsius. It's hard to pinpoint when our ancestors started using fire, but it happened long before Homo sapiens emerged. Fire became a focal point of early human life, helping to ward off predators, make cooked meat softer and tastier, and radiate warmth to heat the surrounding area. Considering that humans living in the wild can develop impressive adaptability to temperature extremes, and adding even basic use of animal hides as coverings or bedding, fire alone could have extended human settlement far beyond tropical and subtropical zones. Strange as it sounds, an open fire and the hearth around which people gathered were prototypes of the first shelters. For hundreds of thousands of years, life revolved around the fire, eventually giving rise to numerous fire-worshipping cults. As humans transitioned into skilled predators, they began pushing northward. The tundra steppes of Eurasia were home to herds of large herbivores, including now extinct megafauna. Unlike in Africa, these animals had evolved without human influence, making them easier prey as they didn't know what to expect from a two-legged predator. While the Ice Age brought drier climates with fewer rains, living by an open fire on the vast Eurasian plains likely wasn't very comfortable. To improve this, people might have built wind-blocking walls out of available materials. Over time, through trial and error, humans developed dome-shaped structures. This design wasn't random. First, heat from a central fire spreads evenly in a circular space. In rectangular spaces, distant corners would stay colder. Today, heating systems warm entire rooms and maintain consistent temperatures. But in the past, whether in shelters made of bones or medieval castles, people stayed close to the fire itself rather than trying to heat the entire space. Second, dome shapes are structurally stable, with evenly distributed loads. That's why, from ancient times until fairly recently, large indoor spaces were often built as domes. You may have seen mammoth bone shelter reconstructions in museums. While these homes were widely used by ancient Homo sapiens, the technique was actually borrowed from Neanderthals. A notable example of Neanderthal architecture was found on the banks of the Dniester River at the Moldova 1 site. It's an oval structure 9 meters in diameter, covering about 63 square meters. The framework was made of mammoth bones, though this doesn't necessarily indicate large-scale hunting of the animals. Mammoths often died naturally, and their remains were well preserved. These bones were used to build the frame, which was likely covered with animal hides. After Neanderthals disappeared, this construction method was adopted by our species. Sites like Kostenki near Voronezh or Mezhyrich in Ukraine are good examples. One such shelter required around 20 tons of bones and an unknown number of hides. These dome-shaped homes, though sturdy, were stationary. They couldn't be moved during seasonal migrations. Interestingly, the tradition of building similar structures but with whale bones survived into the 20th century among the Inuit. Even in the Stone Age, lighter shelters made from wooden poles existed, as evidenced by post holes, small cavities in clay that filled with soil and remain intact to this day. By carefully uncovering these sites, archaeologists can map the post hole patterns to reconstruct the structure's layout. These were likely early versions of what we now call yarangas, or wigwams, dome or cone-shaped frames made of wooden poles covered with hides. However, with the invention of clothing made from hides, humans became capable of living in virtually any environment. For example, Inuit igloos were made entirely of ice, yet the interior often stayed close to 0 degrees Celsius. So, when discussing ancient frame structures, it's important to remember they likely wouldn't be comfortable for modern humans accustomed to stable temperatures. But they worked well for our distant ancestors. Speaking as someone who spent months in a tent and practiced cold exposure, you can adapt to just about anything. With the end of the Ice Age, Eurasia saw vast forests and fuller rivers. Humans began settling down, developing new construction methods that made use of abundant clay, turf, and various plants as roofing materials. This shift wasn't necessarily driven by progress but rather practicality. Farmers couldn't easily gather large quantities of hides. What hides they had were mostly used for clothing and footwear. Even in the Neolithic era, homes often revolved around a central fire. The emergence of square and rectangular house designs seems tied to the rise of fortified settlements. Space within the walls was limited, and rectangular layouts allowed for more efficient use of available land. By the Bronze Age, the development of agriculture led to the rise of nomadic herding cultures. These people lived similarly to hunter-gatherers, except they didn't follow wild herds. They moved alongside their own domesticated animals. By then, the steppe was no longer littered with mammoth bones, so solving the housing problem required surprisingly advanced technologies for their time. If you think about it, you can compare this to a computer. Developing a desktop model is one thing, but making a portable laptop requires tackling weight, heat management, and other challenges. Somewhere around the 2nd millennium BCE, the iconic yurt appeared. Compared to pit houses, semi-dugouts, or adobe homes used by farmers, the yurt was a marvel of design. Its walls were made of collapsible wooden lattices tied together with straps and rawhide. And for those who assume the steppes had no trees, well, that's not entirely true. Forests grew along riverbanks known as gallery forests, often on slopes and valleys. The lattice panels, called karege or similar names depending on the language, were typically made from flexible woods like willow or larch. Dome-shaped poles, usually crafted from birch, were then attached to these lattices. All the poles converged at a central wheel about 1.5 meters in diameter, which served as both a skylight during the day and a chimney for venting smoke. As the sun moved across the sky, its light would illuminate different parts of the yurt, acting like a natural sundial. This helped its inhabitants plan their daily tasks. At the center of the yurt, like in ancient dwellings, was a hearth. Unlike early homes covered in animal hides, the yurt was insulated with felt, a much more advanced material. Interestingly, the word felt itself has Turkic roots, and since nomads were herders, they had no shortage of wool. The wool was pressed and treated with special techniques, sometimes waterproofed with fat or other substances. Nomads also invented felt boots, later adopted by Slavs around the 13th century and known as valenki. While felt might not seem like serious wall material, its thermal properties are impressive. 1 centimeter of felt insulates as well as 20 centimeters of brick. During winter, yurts were often double-layered, achieving insulation levels comparable to adobe or brick walls. Sure, they didn't match stone homes for soundproofing, but that was actually a plus. Nomadic etiquette forbade riding too close to a yurt. Visitors were expected to dismount at a distance. If someone ignored this, the host would immediately know they might be dealing with an enemy. The circular shape of the yurt also made it resilient against strong winds. Yurts could support several tons of snow and were earthquake-resistant. Typically, they were 5 to 6 meters in diameter, with an area of roughly 19 to 30 square meters, about the same as farmer homes. The structure weighed around 200 to 300 kilograms, which wasn't an issue since nomads used pack animals. Setting up a yurt usually took just a few hours, but the design was so versatile that much larger structures could be built. For example, the Guinness World Records lists a yurt in China over 31 meters in diameter with an interior space of nearly 800 square meters. And it wasn't just nomads who used yurts. The Cossacks adopted them, even naming administrative units on the Don River after them. Overall, the yurt was an evolutionary continuation of early shelters. It let people, even with pack animals, live on the move while staying protected from the elements. However, as great as yurts are, they can't quite compete with the comfort of even modest modern brick houses. Let's face it, we all aspire to a comfortable, easy life. But then we discover, for instance, that intermittent fasting triggers autophagy, helping our bodies clear out old or damaged cells. Or that those annoying temperature swings actually boost our immune systems. Even the comfy modern toilet isn't exactly a health booster for your gut, and sitting too much. That habit has sent tens of millions to an early grave. The yurt is a brilliant solution, serving as a home for thousands of years across the vast steppes of Asia and Eastern Europe. Its decline wasn't really due to new housing technologies, but the near disappearance of nomadic pastoralism as a way of life.